The day begins long before the castle rooster crows, and long before the kitchen servants begin bustling through the stone corridors with baskets of stale bread and pots of watered-down ale. For a court jester, a fool by profession but an observer by necessity, the morning starts in silence and shadows, and often with a kind of melancholy that must immediately be buried beneath the layers of paint, color, bells, and laughter demanded by those who rule. Your chamber is hardly a room. It is more like a forgotten storage space at the edge of the servants' quarters, tucked behind a stack of broken barrels and discarded fabrics that once belonged to noble garments. The walls sweat with moisture, the stones perpetually cold even in late summer. A thin mattress stuffed with straw, some of which inevitably scratches your back through the night, serves as your bed. You sit up slowly, stretching limbs stiffened not only by sleep, but by the absurd tasks and acrobatic demands placed upon you each day. You are a soitari, jester, not by birthright, not by choice, but because the court requires entertainment, distraction, and occasionally a voice unafraid to speak truths disguised as jokes. You rise, lighting a tallow candle from the embers of the small brazier the servants never remember to refill. Your fingers are cold as they trace the cracked wooden box containing the tools of your craft. Powders of chalky white, crushed berry pigments for rouge, soot for lining your eyes, bells sewn into leather straps, a cap with floppy ears in mismatched colors, and of course, the motley garment, patched, worn, but unmistakably your uniform. Before the face paint goes on, you stare at your reflection in a small, warped bronze mirror. The undistorted parts show a man fatigued by the weight of the role, a man whose laughter is a mask that hides everything from sorrow to frustration, from fear to ambition. A soitari must never show these things. Your livelihood depends on your ability to hide them. You dip your fingers into the white powder, spreading it slowly across your face. Watching your human expression becomes something else entirely. As the transformation progresses, you no longer belong to yourself. You become property, an asset of the court, a tool of the lords and ladies, a performer whose duty is to amuse, distract, divert, and sometimes humiliate yourself publicly for their benefit. But the jester has power too, subtle, shadowed power. In your jokes, you can speak truths others cannot. In your dances, you can draw attention away from political tension. In your riddles, you can reveal wisdom disguised as foolishness. By the time your costume is fully assembled, the first warm rays of dawn are slipping through the high, narrow windows of the castle corridors. The air smells of damp stone, old rushes, and the faint scent of roasting grains from the kitchens below. The castle awakens slowly. You can hear armored guards beginning their shift change, the clank of steel echoing through the main hall. You hear the murmur of early servants, the scrubbing of floors with wet rags, the shoveling out of cold ashes from the hearths. These sounds form the morning symphony of your world. You step out into the corridor, bells on your cap jingling softly with each movement, a constant reminder that you do not walk in silence. A lord might stride with authority. A knight might thunder down the hall with clanking plates. A servant might sneak quietly to avoid reprimand. But you announce your presence, whether you wish to or not, because every sound from those bells reinforces the role you must inhabit. The first task of the morning is always the same. Deliver early amusement to the young pages and squires eating their bland porridge in the training hall. They adore you, not because they truly understand your jokes, but because your very existence provides a break from the monotony of memorizing rules, carrying shields, and polishing armor for their masters. Fool, fool, do a trick, they shout as you enter. And so you do. You juggle apples stolen from the corner table. You pretend to trip over your own feet, performing a dramatic stumble that sends the boys howling with laughter. You recite a parody of the castle's daily announcements, exaggerating the deep voice of the herald, making fun of the knight who snores so loudly he rattles the rafters. The boys laugh until their sides ache. Their laughter is innocent and genuine, one of the few forms of joy in this place that does not come with consequences. You feed off it, storing those moments somewhere deep inside, because they remind you you're more than a clown. After the morning performance, you are summoned by one of the steward's assistants, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She delivers the message with no warmth whatsoever. His lordship wants entertainment during breakfast, and mind your behavior this time. The last jape about the Duchess's new dress nearly got you whipped. You bow dramatically, bells jingling. Of course, my lady. I shall be as delicate as a goose feather drifting on a summer breeze. She stares at you, unimpressed. Just don't speak of geese. The cook is already furious. You head toward the great hall, where the nobles dine on cured meats, cheese wheels, warmed wine, honeyed bread, and fruits brought from distant markets. You always arrive hungry, though your meal will come later from servants' scraps. Entertainment at the nobles' table is a complex dance, one that requires agility, wit, and flawless timing. You must read the mood of the lords and ladies, judge who is brooding, who is annoyed, who is looking for distraction. You must avoid offending those too sensitive to bear a harmless jest, while also ensuring you aren't so boring you lose your position, or worse. As you enter, the hall is warm with firelight, banners fluttering slightly in the draft. A long table stretches across the room, nobles seated in a hierarchy that mirrors their political influence. You leap forward with exaggerated cheerfulness. My lords, my ladies, a tale to brighten your morning. A story of a knight so brave he once battled a bee and lost. Laughter ripples across the hall. Even the lord of the castle, a stoic man known for his stern discipline, cracks a small smile. Encouraged, you launch into a comedic retelling of yesterday's tournament mishap, when a squire dropped his lord's helmet into a pig trough. Your words are fast but controlled, your gestures wide but purposeful. You juggle wooden cups, perform somersaults, mimic the voices of nobles with careful precision, never so exact as to mock them, but enough to amuse them. The Duchess claps with soft hands, her rings sparkling. The younger noble women giggle behind silk-covered mouths. The knights nod approvingly, though a few narrow their eyes, assessing whether your jokes touch too closely on their pride. For the next hour, you are laughter incarnate. But when breakfast ends, so does your moment of relative safety. The nobles disperse to their duties, the lord to council meetings, the knights to the training grounds, the ladies to their embroidery halls or private chambers. You return to the fringe of the castle again, slipping back into the cracks between the world of servants and the world of nobility, neither fully accepted in either space. As the day unfolds, you will be summoned again and again, by bored noble women seeking distraction, by knights wanting a mock battle demonstration, by the steward, who uses you to lighten the tensions among the kitchen staff, by children craving stories, and sometimes by the Lord himself, needing honest conversation disguised as foolishness. Your day will be long, exhausting, filled with physical exertion, constant smiling, flawless wit, and delicate balance between obedience and cleverly masked truth-telling. But for now, just for a moment, you exhale, leaning against the stone wall of an empty corridor. The bells fall silent. You close your eyes, and behind the painted smile, behind the role the world demands of you, you feel your real self flicker, small, tired, but still alive, because the day of a soitari is not merely one of laughter, it is one of survival. Morning comes not with sunlight, because sunlight rarely reaches the narrow stone corridors beneath the castle, but with the echo of footsteps above your head, heavy boots, iron greaves, the distant murmur of guards changing shifts. Their movements vibrate down the walls like a reminder. Another day, another performance, another mask to wear. You rise from your thin straw mattress, joints stiff from the cold, and for a fleeting moment, you allow yourself to imagine what it would be like to wake without purpose, without obligation, without a role to play. But fantasies are as forbidden as genuine emotions in your profession, so you bury them under a sigh and begin preparing for the day. There is no window to check the weather, no bird to signal dawn, only the dim candle stub that burned through the night, its wick curled into a disfigured knot. You stretch your legs, rubbing the sore muscles from last night's acrobatics. your body reminding you that laughter is purchased with pain. People see jesters as creatures of spontaneity, bubbling joy, quick wit, and boundless energy. But they never see the bruises beneath the bells, the exhaustion heavy as wet cloth, the quiet dread that nests in your ribs like a restless animal. You run your fingers through your hair before pulling on the hood, feeling the familiar texture of the fabric, worn, patched in places you pretend not to notice. Its colors, once bright as summer markets, have faded to tones that resemble memories rather than cloth. You adjust the floppy ears with small brass bells stitched all along their seams. They jingle softly at each movement, a reminder that even when silent, you are never truly allowed to be quiet. The castle servants push open your door without knocking, as always. To them, you are not a private individual. You are a tool, a decoration, a noise meant to amuse. One of them tosses a crust of bread on the table, no greeting, no eye contact, and mutters something about the queen rising early today. You eat the bread in small, slow bites, not because you're savoring it, but because you know it is the only food you will be given until the late afternoon meal, if they remember. Often they don't. When you step out into the corridor, the air shifts. It is warmer here, though still stale with the smell of stone washed countless times with cold water. The guards barely glance your way. Most of them have seen you perform enough to know the songs by heart. Some have even laughed. Others look at you the way one looks at a stray dog. Harmless, mildly amusing, ultimately insignificant. You've become an object to them, something between a mascot and a ghost. Yet, today feels slightly different, as if the castle itself carries a peculiar tension. You sense it in the way the servants whisper in corners, their voices sharp as broken pottery. You see it in the guards especially, the way their hands rest closer to their sword hilts, the way their brows are impenetrably tight. Something is stirring among the nobility, something involving alliances and rivalries you are never allowed to know, but always feel the effects of. When you reach the preparation hall, the musicians are already tuning their lutes and fiddles. Their faces are stiff with sleep and indifference. You exchange nods, but not smiles. You all know the day ahead will be long. The steward enters moments later, pacing with the impatience of a man whose importance exists only because he believes in it. The queen is in a foul mood, he announces sharply. She expects entertainment during the morning feast. Make her laugh. Today of all days, she must laugh. As if laughter were a valve to release political pressure. As if your performance could mend a world constantly fracturing along lines of power. You swallow and nod. You are not allowed to answer him with anything other than obedience. Jesters are expected to speak boldly, mock kings, dance on the edge of insult, yet never cross the invisible lines drawn by pride and tyranny. Your humor is your chain, and though it rattles prettily, it binds you tightly. You rehearse your routine in front of the cracked mirror, balancing, miming, quick-witted lines you've polished in your head since dawn. You test a new joke, one involving the king's prized hunting dog, but abandon it quickly. If delivered wrong, it could be taken as an insult. If delivered right, it could still be taken as an insult. That is your every morning, the razor-thin balance between delight and danger. When the steward returns, he leads you through the grand halls, where tapestries depicting battles you will never fight hang beside portraits of rulers who would never remember your name. The laughter of nobles echoes faintly from beyond the banquet chamber. They are already drinking, already judging, already sharpening their tongues. You inhale deeply, steady your heartbeat, and prepare the persona you must inhabit. Cheerful, lighthearted, alive. Even though inside you still feel as brittle as a dried reed. When the doors open, the noise washes over you. Laughter mixed with clinking goblets, overlapping conversations, the rich aroma of food you will never taste. The nobles glare with anticipation. The queen's expression is unreadable, her fingers tapping against the carved armrest of her chair. You bow deeply, bells chiming, costume rustling, spirit tightening like a knot behind your ribs. And then, with a practiced smile, you begin. The afternoon casts its muted light through the narrow, iron-barred windows of the keep, illuminating the dust that drifts lazily in the air. As the castle begins to shake itself awake for the evening's entertainments, you feel the familiar weight of the hours pressing onto your shoulders. The bells have long stopped ringing, yet you sense time through a different rhythm, one dictated by the shifting moods of nobles, the footsteps of guards in drafty corridors, and the rising hum of a medieval court hungry for distraction. You pull yourself from the cramped wooden bench where you often steal moments of silence, and the stiff jingle of your bells reminds you of the persona you must soon slip into. Your motley costume, reds, greens, faded yellows, hangs awkwardly on your thin frame, smelling faintly of sweat, dust, and old wine from last night's performance. You trace a finger along one of its seams, remembering how many times it has been stitched and repaired. A jester's costume is never new for long. It absorbs everything: laughter, tears, spilled ale, humiliation, triumph, and exhaustion. Outside your small quarters, the castle is already shifting into its evening rhythm. Servants hurry by carrying trays of food and jugs of watered wine. Their expressions are tight, tired, but not unlike your own. Each of you serves the whims of those who do not understand the cost of entertainment or the emotional labor hidden beneath the veneer of obedience. A guard nods at you without truly seeing you, as though you are less of a man and more of a fixture within the stone walls, another object of service, like the torches, the tapestries, the cold wooden tables. Your role is different from the others, though. Where a cook fails and simply disappoints, where a maid fails and goes unnoticed, you fail and invite ridicule, or worse. A jester's mistakes are rarely forgiven, especially in a world where nobility has little mercy and even less patience. Laughter is not just entertainment, it is expectation, obligation, survival. You make your way down the corridor, the stones cold beneath your worn shoes. As you move, you rehearse lines in your head, not jokes exactly, but fragments of humor that can be shaped and twisted depending on the audience's mood. You have learned over years of observation that laughter is rarely spontaneous. It can be manipulated, coaxed, woven like thread. A careless comment can end your career or your life, but the right word can make a baron forget the weight of his taxes, or a lady forget the gossip hanging over her like smoke. As you enter the lower hall, a few children of the servants run past you, then stop, peeking from behind a pillar. They always do this. To them, you are something between a storybook figure and a strange creature that belongs to the castle more than any human. You pull a silly face, crossing your eyes, puffing out your cheeks, and they giggle before disappearing again. Their laughter is genuine, pure, unfiltered by politics or social hierarchy. You cherish those fleeting moments. Children laugh because they want to, not because they expect something from you. They offer a kind of validation you rarely receive from adults. But playtime ends quickly. A steward calls to you, instructing you to prepare for the evening performance in the great hall. Tonight, the Lord hosts merchants from distant cities, men who pride themselves on their wealth, their finely embroidered tunics, and their arrogance. They will want entertainment that affirms their superiority. They will want to laugh at someone beneath them. That someone is you. Still, you nod and smile. Your true face, the one with the tired eyes and heavy thoughts, sinks deeper beneath the mask you must wear. Your painted-on grin is not literal today, but symbolic. Every movement, every tilt of your head, every flourish of your hand is crafted to appear cheerful even when your spirit is anything but. The great hall is already half prepared. Long tables stretch from end to end, draped in embroidered cloth. Servants light torches along the walls, creating dancing shadows that flicker across shields and hunting trophies. You study the scene, imagining how you will move through the space later. A jester must know every inch of the hall, the dangerous spots where spilled ale can make you slip, the narrow spaces between benches where you can leap or bow dramatically, the best places to draw attention and the best places to retreat should a joke land poorly. A musician tunes his lute in the corner, plucking notes that echo lightly across the vaulted ceiling. He gives you a tired nod. Like you, he understands the fragile balance of entertaining the powerful. His fingers blister, Your dignity bruises. Different instruments, same performance. You slip backstage, though backstage is merely an alcove behind a curtain, and begin preparing your set of props. A wooden baton for mock swordplay. Juggling balls patched so many times they barely resemble their original form. A short lute with a cracked neck, which you use more for comedic effect than actual music. A set of masks carved into exaggerated expressions. Happiness, anger, confusion, sorrow. You place them carefully in a row, running your hand over each one. Sometimes you wonder which of these faces resembles your true self. The answer shifts day by day. As you sit quietly, breathing in deeply, a wave of discomfort washes through you. Not physical pain, but the emotional weariness of performance. Being a jester is not simply telling jokes. It is reading the room with near supernatural sensitivity, anticipating tension before it forms, knowing when laughter can diffuse a situation and when silence is safer. You must know the mood of the nobles better than they know themselves. You must understand human psychology long before such words exist to describe it. And above all, you must never forget your place. A jester walks a tightrope stretched thin between entertainment and danger. You cannot mock a noble too sharply. You cannot appear too clever. You cannot appear too foolish. You must be exactly what they expect, and something slightly more, while never once threatening their pride. The curtain shifts. A servant brings you a small cup of watered wine. You accept it, not because it steadies your nerves, but because it reminds you of ritual, of the countless nights you have survived the same routine. You drink slowly, letting the bitterness ground you. Soon the hall fills. Voices surge like a rising tide. You hear laughter, chairs scraping across stone, the clinking of goblets. The performance is near. You stand, rolling your shoulders, stretching your limbs. Your bells jingle softly, not cheerful, but echoing like distant memories. You adjust your hat, making sure the twin points fall neatly to the sides. You rub your face, then put on your practiced grin, the one that says, "I am harmless. I am here to amuse you. I have no thoughts that can threaten you." When the steward signals, you inhale deeply and step out into the golden torchlight. The hall erupts with whistles and applause. Some laugh simply at the sight of you. You bow dramatically, sweeping your hat off your head, letting your exaggerated humility win over those who arrived intending to be critical. And thus begins another long night. A night where you will dance, tumble, juggle, tell stories, and dodge insults disguised as jokes. A night where you will fill the great hall with laughter, while your own heart remains quiet, observing everything. A night where you become, paradoxically, the fool and the wisest person in the room. Because you see everything. You hear everything. You understand what they do not. Your painted smile hides what their golden goblets cannot contain. And as the laughter rises, as the torches crackle, as noble faces blur into a sea of expectation, you move through the performance with practiced grace, balancing humor with survival, joy with pain, humility with self-preservation. A jester in a medieval castle is not merely entertainment. You are the fragile hinge upon which tension rests. And tonight, like every night, you will carry the burden. The mid-morning light filters through the tall, stained glass windows of the great hall, scattering shards of soft color across the stone floor. Faded pinks, withered blues, faint greens that dapple the boots of passing servants like fragments of a broken rainbow. For most, this hour marks merely the turning of the day toward its noisier, more demanding stretch. But for a court jester for you, this time is far more significant, perched delicately between opportunity and danger. It is the hour when the court begins to shift, when the air grows restless with the arrival of nobles, advisors, military captains, petitioners, and schemers. It is the hour when moods begin to form and alliances begin to tremble. And it is the hour when your tongue, more than your bells or motley coat, must be sharpest. You move through the hall, bells chiming with a softness you've mastered. Light, unobtrusive, almost polite. It is a deliberate choice. The court is still stretching awake. No need to burst into their ears like a drunken minstrel. There will be time later for louder gestures. For now, subtlety, awareness, quiet reading of faces. Because a jester is not only the court's entertainment, he is its pressure valve, its weather vane, its unofficial messenger, and sometimes its only honest commentator. And to do all of that, you must first understand the emotional temperature of every soul in the room. At a long table near the far hearth, you spot the young Baroness Sevilla, dressed in soft twilight purple velvet, her shoulders draped in a fur so pristine it could have only come from a northern merchant's special stock. She sips her morning wine, too early for such a drink, which means she is anxious. Her foot taps nervously under the table, the rhythm of someone preparing for confrontation. Useful information, you note silently. You file it away for later. A well-timed joke about warmth, furs, or northern wolves might loosen her expression, or provoke a smile that reveals more than she intends to. Along the opposite wall, two clerics whisper violently, gesturing with their hands like men swatting invisible flies. Their faces are red, their brows rigid, their whispers sharp enough to slice parchment. A dispute, clearly, perhaps about tithes, or doctrine, or a bishop's new decree. You listen without appearing to listen, ears open, posture lazy, expression harmless. A jester, after all, is expected to look distracted by his own thoughts, not attuned to everyone else's. But your ears catch enough phrases. Overspent. Impossible quota. His Grace won't accept it. To tell you conflict is brewing. Conflict you may later be expected to comment on, diffuse, or mock, depending on the king's mood. You step lightly towards the center of the hall, where the great circular rug, the one embroidered with lions and wheat, marks the meeting ground for nobles waiting to be summoned. This morning the rug holds three figures: Captain Aldrich polishing the hilt of his sword, Lady Renala adjusting the feathers in her hairpiece, and old Sir Varman muttering about the draught near the windows. You approach them with your usual half-bow, half-exaggerated flourish, the movement so fluid it has become second nature. "Good morrow, my fine peacocks of politics," you say with a grin bright enough to disarm even the most humorless noble. "I see the feathers are out early today." Lady Renala smirks at the compliment-disguised jab. Captain Aldrich raises an eyebrow, amused but trying not to show it. Sir Varman grumbles something about wasteful tailors, though you suspect he is secretly pleased to be included. You drift among them, offering light commentary, harmless quips, and the sort of sly observations that make everyone feel seen yet unthreatened. For now, your role is to lift moods, not provoke deeper thought. That comes later, when the stakes are higher. As you speak, more nobles enter the hall. The atmosphere thickens with perfumes, layered fabrics, expensive cloaks, clinking jewelry, and conversations buzzing like a growing swarm of bees. The court transforms quickly during this hour, from quiet stone echo chamber to bustling hive of agendas and ambitions. And you, the jester, float at its center like a colorful bee who somehow knows where all the nectar and all the stingers are hidden. Then, just as you prepare to approach a new cluster of courtiers, a familiar voice calls from behind. "Jester." A word. It's Chancellor Rowan, tall, severe, wearing his robes like a man wrapped in legal documents made cloth. His hair is silver and his eyes sharper than any knight's blade. You know better than to ignore him. You pivot instantly, bells chiming obediently, and greet him with a theatrical bow. You summon, and I come bounding like a loyal hound, "My Lord Chancellor." He does not smile. He never smiles. But he also rarely summons you without reason. "The king will be attending the council shortly," Rowan says in a low voice. He is tense. You know what that means. It means the council session will be difficult. It means tempers will spark easily. It means last night's diplomatic letter from the southern borderlands, involving accusations, threats, and troubling reports, has likely soured his mood. And it means your job will be more delicate than usual. "Shall I prepare to oil the gears of governance?" you ask lightly. "Prepare," he replies, "but tread carefully. His Majesty is in no condition for careless barbs." With that, he sweeps away, robes whispering over the stone floor. You let out a slow breath once he's gone. A tense king can be your greatest opportunity. If your words strike true, or your quickest downfall if your wit cuts too deep. You think through possible angles, jokes that soften without diminishing authority, humor that redirects anger, commentary that highlights absurdities without insulting the crown. It is a complex dance, and you must rehearse internally while maintaining your outward facade of carefree playfulness. You decide to move toward the minstrels near the corner. They are tuning their lutes and harps, preparing for the lunchtime performance. One of them, a lanky lad with hair like tangled straw, asks if you'd like accompaniment later. You decline with a grin. I perform best with the music of my own chaos, you tell him. Before leaving the hall for the antechamber, you make one more slow pass through the room, your eyes casually observing everything. Every quiet argument, every forced laugh, every hand trembling around a goblet, every servant rushing with controlled panic. These small details matter. They shape your strategy for the day. A jester must always know who needs cheering, who needs mocking, who needs distraction, and who must be avoided entirely. And then, as you turn the final corner, you catch sight of the king entering from the opposite doorway, crown slightly askew, cloak fluttering behind him like a red storm cloud. His jaw is tight, his stride decisive. You recognize instantly the posture of a man grappling with anger he cannot show, fear he cannot reveal, and expectations he cannot escape. You are to be the invisible hand that steadies him, the shadow that absorbs tension before it ignites the entire court. You straighten your motley coat, adjust your bells, and prepare the mask of cheerful irreverence that has carried you through so many precarious mornings. Another performance begins, one where the stakes are not laughter or applause, but the fragile stability of the realm itself. By the time the sun reaches its lazy descent past the highest tower of the keep, the castle's courtyards begin to shift in mood, drifting from the industrious bustle of morning duties toward a subtler, more expectant rhythm. This is the hour when I, the court jester, painted in colors that hide more than they reveal, must prepare for the evening's entertainment. While my clothing remains the same patchwork of bells, ribbons, and dyed fabrics, my mind moves into a different gear, sharper and more cautious than the outwardly foolish persona I display. The afternoon is a quiet battlefield, filled not with swords but with words, glances, alliances, and secrets that swirl through the palace like invisible smoke. My rehearsals start in a small stone alcove near the kitchen courtyard, shielded from the wind and far from the ears of those who might misconstrue my muttering. Here I polish my jokes, test new riddles, and practice acrobatics until my muscles burn. It is not simply performance. My routines must be flawless. A jester's misstep is not merely embarrassing. It can be politically dangerous. One misplaced joke can insult a noble, one insinuation can be interpreted as treason, and one poorly timed gesture may offend a lord whose pride outweighs his mercy. So I rehearse until every gesture flows like a river, every line snaps with precision, and every expression carries exactly the meaning I intend, and never more. Occasionally, castle's children wander past, peering around the corner to watch me flip, twist, and hop about. Their laughter, pure and unpolitical, is a welcome reminder that joy still exists untouched by intrigue. Sometimes I improvise a short gag just for them, a silly dance, a crooked face, a juggling trick using apples stolen from the kitchen windowsill. The children squeal with delight and scamper off, leaving behind a trail of giggles that momentarily lightens the heavy air of the castle. But the moment they leave, the whispers return. Every corridor holds eyes that pretend not to see and ears that pretend not to listen. While moving through the hallways in search of inspiration, I often overhear servants gossiping about nobles, or guards murmuring about unrest in far provinces. None of this is my business, or so I must insist. Yet a jester's mind collects these details the way a magpie collects shiny trinkets. Every piece of information might someday save my life, or help me craft a joke that pleases the king without offending anyone of higher station. Before supper preparations begin, the steward summons me to the outer hall where the evening schedule is recited in stern detail. A visiting baron arrives tonight, one known for lacking both humor and patience. My performance must be tailored accordingly. No jokes about hunting accidents, no jabs at wealth or lineage, and absolutely no mention of the Baron's rumored misadventures in gambling. I nod obediently, though inside I'm already reshaping my entire act like a potter reshaping clay. A jester must be adaptable. Those who are not rarely last long in a place where etiquette weighs heavier than armor. Once dismissed, I retreat to the herb garden behind the scullery. Here, among rosemary and thyme, I can breathe freely for a few minutes, feeling the cool breeze carry away the warmth I've gathered from endless movement. I stretch my limbs, practice balancing on the stone edging of the garden beds, and take deep breaths to settle my nerves. My afternoon meal, a heel of bread and a thin stew delivered by a sympathetic cook, is eaten quickly, for my stomach cannot afford to be heavy when I need to leap, twist, and act with agility. As the afternoon fades and the shadows of the castle stretch long across the courtyard, I feel the familiar tension building. This is the hour when the world seems to hold its breath. The nobles retreat to dress, the servants scurry to set tables, torches alit along the walls, and the great hall begins its nightly transformation from a place of political maneuvering to a theater where I am expected to shine. Yet beneath the laughter and music that will fill the hall soon, danger still lingers like a hidden undertow. The court demands entertainment, but it also demands perfection. And so, as the sun finally begins to sink beyond the distant treeline, painting the stones of the castle gold and crimson, I gather my bells, adjust my cap, and take one last steadying breath. The evening is approaching, and with it comes my true performance. One that requires far more than jokes. It requires survival. The great hall's door swung open with a measured authority, admitting me into a space already alive with anticipation. Candles flickered along the walls, casting wavering light over the polished stones, tapestries, and the long oaken tables set meticulously for the evening feast. The scent of roasted meats and spiced wine mingled in the air, yet beneath it lay a faint undertone of tension. The invisible hum of politics simmering beneath the surface. Every noble present, even in casual conversation, carried the weight of ambition, suspicion, and concealed agendas. I stepped forward, bells jingling lightly with each measured step, forcing a smile onto my painted face even as a knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. To be seen, to perform, to entertain. It was a necessity, yes, but each motion, each word, each gesture was scrutinized, weighed, and interpreted. The smallest misstep could shift a favor, provoke ire, or become a whispered rumor that followed me for months. I was both entertainer and observer, jester and spy. A single figure balancing on the razor edge of survival. A minor collision between two guests near the entrance caught my eye. A baron brushing against a merchant's daughter, causing a scandalized gasp and a faint exchange of words that would surely be repeated behind closed doors. I noted it carefully, filing the detail away like a bookmark in an endless ledger of observations. My role was not to intervene. It was to notice, to remember, and, if necessary, to exploit these moments with wit later in performance. Every glance, every whispered aside, could fuel a joke, diffuse tension, or subtly shift opinion. Taking my position near the dais, I performed the first exercises, a bow, a somersault, a juggling routine with painted apples lifted from the kitchen. Applause came in measured waves, polite yet cautious. Nobles were wary of laughter. It could conceal mockery, signal favor, or betray thought. I fed off the energy, carefully modulating each movement, each expression. The painted smile on my face was no longer merely for amusement. It was a tool, a shield, and sometimes a weapon. As I moved into the first sequence of riddles and wordplay, the subtle ripples of intrigue began to surface. A countess leaned toward her neighbor, lips moving in whispered tones, and I caught the faintest smirk on a duke's face as he subtly corrected a mispronunciation of a visiting ambassador. Every detail mattered. Even a well-timed pause could shift attention, realign focus, or diffuse tension that threatened to erupt into argument. My mind raced to anticipate, to adapt, to weave the currents of conversation into a coherent rhythm that supported my performance while shielding me from the consequences of failure. Midway through my acrobatics, an unexpected sound echoed from the far corner, a glass shattering, followed by a sharp exclamation. Eyes darted, and a hush fell over part of the hall. I adjusted my steps mid-flip, bell jingling sharply, landing with precision that drew polite applause, masking curiosity and alarm. A servant had dropped a tray, yet I knew the incident would be interpreted differently. Perhaps an omen, a subtle reflection of incompetence, or a prelude to whispered gossip. Every event became layered with meaning, and every gesture from me, no matter how lighthearted, was weighed against these undercurrents. I incorporated the disruption into my act seamlessly, spinning it into a visual joke that drew laughter, breaking the tension with a single gesture. Relief flickered briefly in the faces of nobles, yet the incident left its residue, a subtle reminder of fragility, of how swiftly order could collapse even in moments of mirth. My body moved with habitual fluidity, yet my mind was alert, calculating every possible implication, cataloging the reactions of those whose favor or ire could determine my survival. Beyond the act itself, my role was to sense, to interpret, and sometimes to manipulate. The king watched from his throne, eyes glinting with amusement, but also assessment. The slightest hesitation, slip in timing, could be read as incompetence, or worse, insolence. I adjusted my gestures, careful not to lean too long toward one noble, to avoid signaling favoritism, to maintain the delicate illusion of impartiality that the court demanded of me. Every laugh I drew, every smile I evoked, was measured, calculated, a tightrope walk between delight and danger. By the time the main course was served, I had moved seamlessly from riddles to acrobatics to subtle pantomime, each piece a layer of engagement and observation. A minor scuffle erupted at a side table, a young lord's anger at a poorly poured cup of wine, and I wove a silent jest, a small glance, that drew the attention away from potential escalation. Moments like these, unnoticed by many, revealed the true weight of my role. A jester could not merely entertain. He must preserve balance, diffuse crises, and act as both observer and intermediary. As the evening wore on, the candlelight deepened, shadows lengthened, and a soft tension settled over the hall. The visiting baron's attention was fickle, his laughter rare, yet I adjusted, shifting my words and gestures to draw small smiles without overstepping boundaries. Behind the scenes, I noted alliances forming, quiet rivalries intensifying, and subtle power plays unfolding across the tapestry of tables. My act became less about humor and more about strategy. Every joke, gesture, and pirouette carried purpose, a calculated interplay of distraction, observation, and survival. The children, now tucked away for the night, had left a trace of innocence in the hall, but I was acutely aware of the dangers that surrounded me. A misheard word, a poorly chosen jest, or a glance held too long could trigger lasting consequences. I moved with precision, balancing the chaos around me, my painted face a mask of perpetual amusement, even as my mind navigated the labyrinth of politics and hidden threats. As the final act approached, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a blend of exhilaration and dread. The performance was no longer a display of skill alone. It was a delicate negotiation, a dance with unseen dangers. Bells jingled, feet flipped, and every word carried layered meaning. The hall was alive with laughter, applause, and unspoken tension. Each successful sequence was a small triumph. Each avoided misstep of victory over the unseen forces that constantly threatened my position. By the end of the evening, as torches flickered and nobles began to retire, I allowed myself a small breath, aware that the mask I wore could be removed, if only briefly. Yet the court never truly sleeps. Tomorrow would bring new audiences, new expectations, and the same precarious balance between performance and survival. And I, the painted jester, would continue to navigate the dangerous theater of the palace, where a single laugh could both save and imperil a life. The hall had quieted, yet the echoes of my bells and laughter lingered like ghostly traces. The audience had dispersed, leaving behind the scent of spiced wine, candle smoke, and polished stone. I remained for a moment, crouched near the edge of the dais, letting my chest rise and fall as though attempting to release the tension of hours spent performing, observing, and calculating. My painted smile had faded, leaving the faint shadow of fatigue etched across my features. The adrenaline that had carried me through acrobatics, riddles, and subtle interventions drained slowly, replaced by the heavier weight of awareness, an acute consciousness of the court's invisible machinery. The castle corridors were emptying as well, yet I sensed them teeming with secrets. Servants whispered behind closed doors, guards exchanged furtive glances, and shadows seemed to stretch longer, hiding more than mere darkness. Every footstep I took was accompanied by an internal rhythm of vigilance, the knowledge that one misstep, one overheard word, could ripple through the delicate networks of influence and rumor. I felt both exposed and unseen, a single figure navigating a labyrinth of power where laughter could be a shield or a trap. As I made my way down the spiraling stairwell, I noticed the subtle disarray left in the wake of the evening's entertainment. A tipped chair, a wine-stained carpet, a scattered set of juggling balls, all ordinary traces of human movement, yet in this castle, even the smallest anomaly demanded scrutiny. My mind catalogued each detail, noting possible interpretations. A lord's hand too close to another's goblet, a servant's hurried glance at a noble's papers, a child left unsupervised near the edge of a balcony. Every fragment of information became part of an intricate mental map, one I navigated with equal measures of curiosity and caution. Reaching the outer gallery, I paused to lean against the cold stone balustrade. The moon had risen, silvering the courtyard below and casting long, distorted shadows. From this vantage, the castle seemed both majestic and treacherous, a labyrinth of power and danger. I inhaled the cool night air, tasting both freedom and anxiety. Tonight had been a successful performance, yet success did not equate to safety. There were always consequences hidden behind laughter, outcomes veiled by applause, and alliances forged in whispers that could shift like sand. A sudden noise shattered the fragile stillness, a distant clang, perhaps a dropped pail or a mismanaged latch. Yet my instincts flared. The corridors of the castle had taught me long ago that ordinary sounds were often the prelude to extraordinary consequences. I moved silently along the gallery, cloak brushing against the stone, mask subtly shadowing my face. Every sense was heightened. The creak of floorboards, the faint rustle of fabric, the scent of candle wax mingled with herbs. Even in the absence of visible threat, I felt the pulse of danger, a quiet drumbeat beneath the surface of courtly life. Inside the chamber beyond the gallery, I paused again. A minor skirmish of intrigue had unfolded unnoticed by most. A misdelivered message, a glance exchanged between a young lord and an ambitious knight. I watched as each actor retreated into the shadows, every motion deliberate, calculating, and purposeful. I understood instinctively that my knowledge of this minor drama could be weaponized or misunderstood. Even a jester, cloaked in humor and folly, must navigate the currents of power with precision. Miscalculation could be fatal. As I descended further toward the servant quarters, I caught sight of a figure slipping silently through a side passage. A messenger, cloaked and hooded, carried a folded note, moving with purpose and urgency. My heart quickened. The castle was alive with messages, instructions, and secrets. Every corner held a story, every shadow a potential threat. I considered intercepting the messenger, not out of curiosity, but from a learned understanding that information itself was a form of currency, and withholding or redirecting it could preserve life or destroy it. Yet prudence prevailed. My role required observation above intervention, subtlety above confrontation. By the time I reached the herb garden tucked behind the scullery, my legs ached, and the lingering tension of performance weighed upon my shoulders. I knelt beside the rosemary and thyme, brushing soil from my hands, and allowed a moment of silence to settle over me. But even here, in the relative solitude of moonlit greenery, the weight of the court pressed in. The castle's life did not pause for reflection, and the pulse of intrigue continued unabated. Whispers carried on the wind, fragments of plots, rumors, and misdirection brushing against the edges of my awareness. I moved deeper into the garden, finding a small stone bench beneath a twisting vine. Sitting, I allowed the mask of painted amusement to fall from my face, revealing fatigue, doubt, and an awareness that every evening was a test not merely of skill, but of survival. My mind wandered through the events of the night, tracing patterns of influence, noting minor missteps and fortunate improvisations. Each laugh I had drawn, each smile I had provoked, was a thread in the web I spun, delicate yet essential. The night was deepening, and with it, my own sense of vulnerability. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, distorted by torchlight and moonlight, creating phantom figures that seemed to move with intent. I imagined eyes watching, hidden in corners and alcoves, judging every gesture, every word. Even alone, I was aware of the countless invisible players, the nobles, servants, and courtiers, each participating in a silent game whose rules were unspoken yet ruthlessly enforced. A sudden rustle among the bushes startled me. I leapt instinctively, bells jingling faintly, and peered into the darkness. Nothing, yet the moment lingered, reminding me that the castle's life was never entirely predictable. Every night brought new variables, unseen hazards, and the constant necessity of vigilance. My laughter and skill could entertain, diffuse, and distract, but they could never fully shield me from the subtle currents of threat that ran like veins through every stone of this fortress. Finally, I allowed myself to lean back, closing my eyes briefly, taking a measured breath. The garden, quiet and fragrant, offered only temporary refuge. The castle would not sleep, nor would the dangers within it abate. But for a few minutes, I let the mask slip, acknowledging the fatigue, the anxiety, and the awareness that tomorrow would demand the same vigilance, wit, and delicate balance. In this moment of fleeting reprieve, I understood fully that my survival depended not on folly or jest alone, but on perception, adaptability, and the relentless attention to every detail, every movement, every glance that passed through this hall of power. And as the night deepened further, with moonlight shimmering across stone and foliage, I prepared myself to rise again, to move silently, observe carefully, and continue the endless dance between amusement and peril, the eternal role of a jester within a court that demanded laughter and yet tolerated nothing less than perfection. The castle's great hall was already alive with whispers and shifting glances when I arrived, my bells jingling faintly with every careful step. Tonight, the court seemed unusually tense, a silent undercurrent of suspicion rippling through even the most mundane gestures. The nobles were clustered in small groups, their laughter clipped, their smiles calculated. Every corner of the hall carried a potential misstep, a subtle insult, or an unobserved plot that could be uncovered in the wrong hands. I, the jester, navigated the sea of hidden agendas as if walking a narrow bridge, balancing charm, wit, and vigilance in equal measure. I began with simple acrobatics, flipping and twisting in ways designed to catch the eye, but not draw the ire of anyone particularly sensitive. My movements were precise, every gesture honed to convey amusement without provocation. Yet even as the nobles clapped politely, my eyes scanned the room. I noted a sudden exchange between the Viscount and the King's steward, a paper handed too quickly, a glance held slightly too long. Such details were small, almost imperceptible, but to me they spoke volumes. Each whisper, each furtive glance, was a thread in a web of intrigue, and one misstep could unravel everything. Midway through my performance, a sudden commotion erupted near the far side of the hall. A young lord had toppled a candelabra, and flames flickered dangerously close to a tapestry. Gasps spread through the audience, and I seized the moment. With a deft leap and a playful pirouette, I incorporated the incident into my act, twisting it into a humorous scene that drew attention away from the potential disaster. Laughter rippled through the hall, though beneath it I could sense the tension. Some eyes measured my response, calculating whether I had saved the situation or merely drawn focus to my own boldness. The king, watching from his elevated seat, allowed a small, approving smile, though his gaze remained sharp. I understood that approval was only temporary. One miscalculated jest, one slip of attention, and the favor could vanish as quickly as it had appeared. Yet the hall demanded entertainment, and I had to provide it, all while absorbing, analyzing, and anticipating every subtle motion of those around me. A sudden interruption arrived in the form of an unexpected guest, a foreign ambassador, arriving late and unannounced, bearing tidings from distant lands. His presence shifted the dynamics instantly. Courtiers whispered urgently, shifting allegiances subtly to account for his arrival. I adjusted my act in real time, weaving in physical comedy that was light enough to entertain, but neutral enough to avoid offense. Every gesture, every flick of a hand, was chosen with extreme precision, designed to maintain balance within a volatile atmosphere. The ambassador's eyes scanned the hall, landing briefly on me. I offered a jovial bow and a small flourish, the painted grin masking the acute awareness I carried. This single acknowledgement, innocuous to the casual observer, was interpreted as a diplomatic gesture by some, a challenge by others. Every movement in the hall carried dual meaning, and I navigated them all. A performer whose skill was measured not by laughter alone, but by the subtle preservation of order in a space teeming with tension. As the evening progressed, I began to weave my riddles and wordplay, interspersed with acrobatics. One noble's smile lingered too long, another's glance betrayed impatience. I adapted, twisting the narrative of my performance to accommodate these tiny cracks in attention, redirecting focus where necessary, drawing laughter to mask potential discord. My role had become less entertainment and more orchestrated diplomacy, a delicate dance between amusement and influence. Towards the end of the evening, an unforeseen crisis occurred. A servant had spilled a tray of ink near the king's table, staining both papers and the floor. Panic stirred quietly among the aides, and tension threatened to erupt. Instinctively, I leapt into action, juggling the ink-stained objects into a small comedic sequence that drew laughter while preventing a potential outburst. The hall's reaction was a mixture of amusement and admiration. I had once again turned chaos into controlled spectacle. By the time the candles had burned low and the last of the nobles departed, I allowed myself a small moment of relief. The king's nod was approving yet measured, the ambassador's glance neutral, and the court's intricate web of intrigue had survived another night intact. I retreated toward the scullery, feeling both the exhaustion of performance and the mental strain of navigating a living labyrinth of politics, suspicion, and subtle dangers. Even alone, the weight of the night lingered. I leaned against a cold stone wall, bells silent, painted grin replaced by the quiet tension etched across my face. Each event, each subtle exchange of glances and gestures, had left its mark on my mind. I understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new guests, and new hazards. My survival, and indeed the survival of balance within the court, depended not merely on skill or acrobatics, but on constant vigilance, observation, and the ability to improvise under pressure. And so, as I extinguished the last of the candles in the side corridors, I prepared mentally for the next day, knowing that the jester's role was eternal: to amuse, to observe, to intervene subtly, and to survive. Tonight had been a triumph of adaptation, wit, and precise judgment, a delicate preservation of order beneath the painted mask of folly. The castle's great hall was already alive with whispers and shifting glances when I arrived, my bells jingling faintly with every careful step. Tonight, the court seemed unusually tense, a silent undercurrent of suspicion rippling through even the most mundane gestures. The nobles were clustered in small groups, their laughter clipped, their smiles calculated. Every corner of the hall carried a potential misstep, a subtle insult, or an unobserved plot that could be uncovered in the wrong hands. I, the jester, navigated the sea of hidden agendas as if walking a narrow bridge, balancing charm, wit, and vigilance in equal measure. I began with simple acrobatics, flipping and twisting in ways designed to catch the eye, but not draw the ire of anyone particularly sensitive. My movements were precise, every gesture honed to convey amusement without provocation. Yet even as the nobles clapped politely, my eyes scanned the room. I noted a sudden exchange between the viscount and the king's steward, a paper handed too quickly, a glance held slightly too long. Such details were small, almost imperceptible, but to me they spoke volumes. Each whisper, each furtive glance, was a thread in a web of intrigue, and one misstep could unravel everything. Midway through my performance, a sudden commotion erupted near the far side of the hall. A young lord had toppled a candelabra, and flames flickered dangerously close to a tapestry. Gasps spread through the audience, and I seized the moment. With a deft leap and a playful pirouette, I incorporated the incident into my act, twisting it into a humorous scene that drew attention away from the potential disaster. Laughter rippled through the hall, though beneath it I could sense the tension. Some eyes measured my response, calculating whether I had saved the situation or merely drawn focus to my own boldness. The king, watching from his elevated seat, allowed a small, approving smile, though his gaze remained sharp. I understood that approval was only temporary. One miscalculated jest, one slip of attention, and the favor could vanish as quickly as it had appeared. Yet the hall demanded entertainment, and I had to provide it, all while absorbing, analyzing, and anticipating every subtle motion of those around me. A sudden interruption arrived in the form of an unexpected guest, a foreign ambassador, arriving late and unannounced, bearing tidings from distant lands. His presence shifted the dynamics instantly. Courtiers whispered urgently, shifting allegiances subtly to account for his arrival. I adjusted my act in real time, weaving in physical comedy that was light enough to entertain, but neutral enough to avoid offense. Every gesture, every flick of a hand, was chosen with extreme precision, designed to maintain balance within a volatile atmosphere. The ambassador's eyes scanned the hall, landing briefly on me. I offered a jovial bow and a small flourish, the painted grin masking the acute awareness I carried. This single acknowledgement, innocuous to the casual observer, was interpreted as a diplomatic gesture by some, a challenge by others. Every movement in the hall carried dual meaning, and I navigated them all, a performer whose skill was measured not by laughter alone, but by the subtle preservation of order in a space teeming with tension. As the evening progressed, I began to weave my riddles and wordplay, interspersed with acrobatics. One noble smile lingered too long, another's glance betrayed impatience. I adapted, twisting the narrative of my performance to accommodate these tiny cracks in attention, redirecting focus where necessary, drawing laughter to mask potential discord. My role had become less entertainment and more orchestrated diplomacy, a delicate dance between amusement and influence. Towards the end of the evening, an unforeseen crisis occurred. A servant had spilled a tray of ink near the king's table, staining both papers and the floor. Panic stirred quietly among the aides, and tension threatened to erupt. Instinctively, I leapt into action, juggling the ink-stained objects into a small comedic sequence that drew laughter while preventing a potential outburst. The hall's reaction was a mixture of amusement and admiration. I had once again turned chaos into controlled spectacle. By the time the candles had burned low and the last of the nobles departed, I allowed myself a small moment of relief. The king's nod was approving yet measured, the ambassador's glance neutral, and the court's intricate web of intrigue had survived another night intact. I retreated toward the scullery, feeling both the exhaustion of performance and the mental strain of navigating a living labyrinth of politics, suspicion, and subtle dangers. Even alone, the weight of the night lingered. I leaned against a cold stone wall, bells silent, painted grin replaced by the quiet tension etched across my face. Each event, each subtle exchange of glances and gestures, had left its mark on my mind. I understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new guests, and new hazards. My survival, and indeed the survival of balance within the court, depended not merely on skill or acrobatics, but on constant vigilance, observation, and the ability to improvise under pressure. And so, as I extinguished the last of the candles in the side corridors, I prepared mentally for the next day, knowing that the jester's role was eternal: to amuse, to observe, to intervene subtly, and to survive. Tonight had been a triumph of adaptation, wit, and precise judgment. a delicate preservation of order beneath the painted mask of folly. The first faint hues of dawn began to seep through the castle's high windows, painting the stone walls with tentative streaks of pink and gold. Yet the halls remained alive, not with the bustle of morning duties, but with the quieter, more insidious rhythms of lingering intrigue. I moved carefully through the corridors, cloak brushing the cold stone, bells muted, painted face weary yet alert. Every step was a negotiation between visibility and discretion, between humor and the hidden necessity of vigilance. The events of the night pressed heavily upon my mind. The toppled candelabra, the spilled ink, the hurried courier, all minor crises that could have escalated into disasters, replayed in my thoughts, each a lesson in improvisation, observation, and survival. But now, in the early hours before the court fully stirred, the challenges had become less obvious, more subtle. Whispered conspiracies, unread letters, faint glances between nobles whose loyalty remained uncertain. Even silence carried weight, and I walked among it with heightened sensitivity. As I rounded a corner into the servants' passage, I spotted a shadow detach itself from the darkness. A young page, eyes wide and hands trembling, approached with a folded note. The courier from the previous night had returned with urgent instructions from a distant lord, and the message bore implications I could scarcely anticipate. I accepted it with a careful bow, concealing my concern beneath a practiced smile. Each missive carried power, sometimes literal, sometimes psychological, and the act of receiving, reading, and choosing whether to react was fraught with subtle peril. I retreated to the gallery overlooking the inner courtyard, taking a deep breath as I unfolded the note. The words were concise, yet loaded with implication. The ambassador's visit was to be extended. Negotiations over alliances and territories were intensifying, and a minor but influential noble had voiced dissatisfaction with the king's handling of recent affairs. A single poorly timed jest, a misread gesture, or a careless glance could now shift the delicate balance of the court. My stomach tightened, and my hands itched for the familiar, controlled motions of performance that might redirect attention or mollify tension. Stepping carefully along the gallery, I glanced down at the courtyard below. The morning light glimmered on the paving stones, but it did not illuminate the subtle dangers lurking in the shadows. Servants moved with rehearsed efficiency, yet each step could betray a secret. Each whisper could carry information to the wrong ears. I reminded myself that my role extended far beyond entertainment. I was a sentinel, an observer, a mediator between amusement and crisis, between laughter and political survival. Suddenly, a clatter echoed from the west wing. A tray overturned, perhaps, or a mismanaged door. Reflexively, I shifted toward the sound, weaving through corridors with silent precision. A young lord stumbled into view, his expression frantic. A minor altercation, threatening to spiral into chaos. Instinctively, I intervened with a quick performance, tossing a small wooden prop into the air, executing a spin, and delivering a clever quip that redirected attention and drew laughter. The crisis passed, unnoticed by most, yet I knew that each small victory carried consequences unseen. By mid-morning, the court began to stir fully. Torches had been replaced by sunlight. The kitchen staff moved in rhythmic precision, and nobles took their places for the first meetings of the day. I lingered in the periphery, bells silent, painted face masking a mind calculating every movement, every glance, every breath. The ambassador, now seated with an air of quiet authority, observed the room carefully, noting each gesture and response. I adjusted my stance, subtly shifting attention with a jest, a tilt of the head, a playful bow. Small movements designed to preserve equilibrium while maintaining the appearance of frivolity. And yet, even as I executed these motions, the weight of exhaustion pressed upon me. My limbs ached from hours of acrobatics and improvisation. My mind buzzed with analysis and anticipation. I could feel the gradual unraveling of my own composure, the faint tremor beneath the mask of humor. Survival required constant vigilance, adaptability, and precision. But even these could falter under the weight of fatigue. A sudden commotion drew my eyes upward. A group of courtiers had gathered near the king's table, their voices low yet animated, signaling a brewing dispute over territorial negotiations. I noted the subtle signs, the flush on a cheek, the tightening of a fist, the narrowing of eyes. Without intervention, this could escalate. With intervention, I risked drawing unwanted attention. Carefully, I approached, delivering a small, harmless jest that drew laughter, redirected attention, and smoothed the tension just enough to avert open conflict. My heart raced, yet my movements remained fluid, practiced, precise. As the sun rose higher, the castle filled with the intricate dance of daily affairs. Servants, guards, nobles, and visitors moved in overlapping currents of obligation, ambition, and subtle menace. I observed, performed, and intervened when necessary, every action calculated, every gesture laden with dual purpose. My painted smile had become not just a facade, but a tool, a shield, and occasionally a weapon. By midday, I allowed myself a brief reprieve in the herb garden, the same sanctuary that had served me countless nights before. I rested against the stone bench, inhaling the fragrance of rosemary, thyme, and lavender. The weight of the morning's crises pressed upon me, yet in this brief moment of solitude, I found clarity. Humor had saved the day. Attention had preserved order, and my subtle interventions had maintained equilibrium. But I knew that the castle's delicate balance was temporary, that new crises would arise, and that my vigilance must never waver. Rising from the bench, I adjusted my tattered cloak and took a deep breath. The court awaited, full of intrigue, hidden agendas, and unspoken threats. I was ready, not just to entertain, but to observe, influence, and survive. The jester's life was a perpetual negotiation between amusement and peril, and as sunlight streamed into the castle courtyard, I embraced the challenge with all the skill, wit, and cunning I could muster. By mid-morning, the castle had settled into its uneasy rhythm, yet the echoes of the night's hidden crises still reverberated through the corridors. I moved slowly through the grand hall, bells silent, painted face pale, but composed. Each step was measured. The mask of the jester remained, yet beneath it, my mind churned with the weight of the past hours. I had entertained, diverted, and subtly influenced, and now the consequences of those actions lingered like shadows, waiting to be observed, remembered, or challenged. The ambassador, now fully awake and seated at the king's table, observed with a quiet, piercing gaze. Courtiers whispered behind fans and tapestries, their words laced with speculation and veiled commentary. I sensed the subtle shifts in alliances, the narrowing of eyes, the flicker of hesitation in gestures, the tension coiling in silent pauses. Every nuance mattered. One wrong movement, one misinterpreted jest, could unravel the delicate equilibrium I had spent the entire night preserving. As the morning sun streamed through the high windows, I made my way to the herb garden, seeking a fleeting reprieve. Here, amid rosemary, thyme, and lavender, the world felt marginally simpler, though only for a moment. I leaned against the cool stone, inhaling deeply, and allowed myself a private reflection. The night had been a test, not of physical agility alone, but of wit, judgment, and survival instinct. Every joke, every pirouette, every subtle distraction had been a calculated maneuver. And yet, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily against me. The toll of constant vigilance etched into every line of my painted face. A sudden ripple of commotion erupted from the great hall. The foreign ambassador had risen, approaching the king with a letter bearing urgent news. Whispers surged like a tide among the nobles. Some froze, others exchanged anxious glances, and a faint murmur of apprehension coursed through the hall. I watched closely, my mind calculating, my body ready to move should the need arise. Crises, I had learned, could escalate in the blink of an eye. The jester's role was not only to amuse but to observe, to intervene when subtlety alone might prevent disaster, to navigate chaos without being consumed by it. With careful precision, I maneuvered through the hall, positioning myself to observe without drawing attention. The ambassador spoke in measured tones, the king's responses clipped and deliberate, and the courtiers leaned subtly forward, balancing curiosity with restraint. My painted grin belied the rapid assessment occurring behind my eyes. Every gesture, every syllable, every glance was weighed for consequence. I noticed a noble subtly repositioning a chair, another adjusting a sleeve, a third suppressing a cough. All minor actions, yet laden with potential significance. Suddenly, a tray of goblets wobbled dangerously near the king's table. Without hesitation, I lunged, diverting the tray with a deft pirouette, sending laughter rippling through the hall and transforming potential disaster into a moment of levity. The king's eyes crinkled slightly in acknowledgement, while the ambassador's gaze remained unreadable. Small victories, imperceptible to most, were the lifeblood of survival here. By noon, the tension had eased slightly, though the undercurrent of intrigue remained unbroken. I slipped to the periphery, taking note of every face, every whispered exchange, every movement that could presage future conflict. The jester's mask had become more than a costume. It was a lens through which I could perceive the fragile structure of power, amusement, and influence within the castle walls. Humor was the tool, vigilance the shield, and intuition the sword. Finally, I retreated to the herb garden one last time, allowing myself to breathe in the faintly fragrant air. The bells on my cloak remained silent, the painted grin softened, and I allowed a small, private exhale. The castle had endured another cycle of crisis, humor, and subtle manipulation. I had survived the night, preserved order, and, in my small way, steered events toward stability. Yet beneath the relief, I felt a quiet unraveling of tension, a gentle acknowledgement of fatigue, fear, and the delicate weight of responsibility. The court would awaken fully soon, with new challenges, new whispers, and new crises. But for now, in this brief interlude, I allowed myself the luxury of stillness, reflection, and the understanding that my life, the painted, bell-laden, paradoxical life of a court jester, was a constant negotiation between chaos and control, laughter and survival. As the sun climbed higher, casting its golden light across the castle, I rose from the stone bench, adjusted my cloak, and took one last glance at the courtyard. The day awaited, the court would continue, and I would perform, observe, and endure. And so, with the jester's peculiar blend of humor, acumen, and subtle power, I embraced the day, knowing that in the delicate theater of the castle, survival itself was the grandest performance of all.